Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Maitland City Council meeting of June 27th, 2022. Please remember to silence your phone. I think first we're going to have a moment of silence, if we would, and then we'll get into the pledge. First, join me in a moment of silence, please. Thank you. All right, if you would, if you're willing and able, please join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Our first order of business is public hearing on the ordinance of amending Chapter 5. Lauren, please read the title.
An ordinance of the City of Maitland, Florida, amending the Maitland City Code of Ordinances, deleting remaining portions of Chapter 5, Article 6 of the City Code, relating to signs that became mute upon the adoption of the updated Land Development Code, providing a severability clause, providing for conflicts, and providing for an effective date.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Dan, do you want to take this, or who's?
This is just a cleanup from the ordinance 1396 that intended to remove all of Chapter 5.
Okay, so we've been through it before. Does anybody have any questions of Lori or Dan while we're here? Just clean up ordinance. Let's open the public hearing. Would anybody from the public like to comment on this second reading of the ordinance? Let's close the public hearing. Any further discussion?
I'm happy to make a motion on it though.
Okay, please do.
I'd like to make a motion to move to adopt an ordinance further amending Chapter 5 by deleting the remaining portions of Article 6 of the Code of Ordinance as presented.
Okay, we have a motion.
I will second that by motion.
And we have a second. Lauren, please call the roll.
Councilmember Wurzel? Aye. Councilmember Wild?
Aye.
Councilmember Guthrie?
Aye.
Councilmember Hall Harrison?
Aye.
Mayor Lowndes?
Aye. Okay, we cleaned up the ordinance. Next item is old business. Mr. Regenting, we have any old business you'd like to report?
No, sir.
Okay. Moving right along into the consent agenda. Does anybody wish to remove any items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, let's ask for public comments on the consent items 2 through 4.
Yeah, Dale McDowell, 108 Tangela Court. I'd like to pull down a good item number 2.
Number 2, okay. Thank you. Anybody else from the public have any comment? Let's close the public period. Mr. McDonald has requested that we pull number 2. Does any member of the council like to do that? Make a motion to pull that?
I'll make a motion to pull it.
Okay, so we'll move that down to, what are we going after decisions or after discussion? Let's do it, yeah, let's do it after decision. After.
It does,
Yeah.
yeah. After decision.
Okay.
That'll be the second item in decision.
Second item of decisions. This rapid rate will be there very shortly. Okay. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? If there's none, motion would be in order.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda absent number 2.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Motion in a second. Laura, please call the roll.
Councilmember Hall Harrison?
Aye.
Councilmember Wurzel? Aye. Councilmember Wild?
Aye.
Councilmember Guthrie?
Aye.
Mayor Lowndes?
Aye. Okay, we have most of the consent agenda approved. We'll bring it back to you a little later. Now is the time for the public period. Does anybody from the public wish to address us on any item that's not on the consent agenda? Oh, perfect timing.
She's probably here to talk about.
Please, yes, please come on up to.
She's probably here, John, to talk about the item that we moved to the regular agenda.
Oh, okay.
I would guess.
What?
You Bev, is this something that's about something that's on the agenda tonight or something that's not?
No, I haven't looked at the agenda, but I don't think so.
Okay.
I could quickly pen it in.
What's that? Do you have, is your microphone on? Just want to make sure we can get you.
It has green light on it. Let's see.
Good, you're good then.
Okay. All right. I'm here tonight to just convey some happenings that I've come across in the last few weeks. And when you are part of the city, working on the council side, you tend to have different rules maybe than what you would if you're a citizen. So I will throw these out, but now I'm a citizen. I have to come up here to say this. My name is Bev Reppinen. I live at 1760 Thunderbird Trail. And I want to talk about how we're being addressed, citizens are being addressed in the community park. When I went into the community park building, I asked if there was someone I could talk to about what was happening in the park. And the answer to that was, well, no, we really don't have a director or anything right now. And so I said, okay, how about if I leave a message and hopefully get an answer back. But what happened was, I never found out a word of return. I did find out on my phone, just by looking at what was going on, that the cost of removing the trees has to be a very, very substantial amount. Yet, no one seems to know the scope of the work. I asked, has this been approved? Has it gone to council? How much is it going to cost? Nobody seemed to know that. I was told by staff there was an arborist on staff, but there hasn't been an arborist on staff for a long time. And when I was told this, I kind of went, sure. And two of the staff people did confirm, though, that they knew there was no arborist on staff. And then I asked myself, how does a plan to redo the trees in a community park, this isn't some people's park, it's everybody's park, and I better speed up, get approved without an arborist approving the plan? In fact, there's not even a plan to look at. So I asked, well, how much has been set aside for this project? Nobody seems to know. Okay, who's in charge of this project? Again, I couldn't get an answer. A citizen approached me and a couple of others, and they were really, really distressed with what was happening, and I was too. So I followed it, I took pictures of what was happening so I could actually bring forth something that would help others understand. Just to let you know, though, I will tell you that 2 months ago, a gal stopped me and she says, there's a hanging branch right out in the middle of the road as you leave the park. And she said, it's going to drop and it needs to be taken care of. I said, I'll take care of it right now. So I walked back to the office and I let them know that that was out there. They said, okay, we'll take care of it. Well, 2 months later, it's still hanging there dangling. I asked if a sign explaining what's going on in the park, that it could be posted at the entry to the building, or at the entry to the park, or at the other entry to the park. And I was told, yes, that could happen. It happens all the time with other projects in the park. So it wasn't like I was asking something different. Okay, I'm just about done here, okay? And I will say this, I was coming ready to fight about the garbage pickups. My garbage pickup was sitting 9 days in the same spot out in the street, but they came and got it today, so I won't complain about that. Okay, thank you.
think, anybody else have any comments this evening?
Hello, you all know me. I'm Stacy Larson, the director of the Maitland Public Library, and I'm calling to remind you we are at the midpoint of summer reading. My very, very favorite regular summer reading presenter will be this Thursday at 2 o'clock. It's Professor Doodad, and he always has an amazingly fun, yet somehow educational, science-based, messy summer program. This year, his program is on the 5 senses. He's always a good time. So I encourage you, if you have smallish people in your world, to register for summer reading, 2 o'clock this Thursday for Professor Doodad. And then in 2 weeks, we will have ocean trivia. And next month, we are also going to have a big finale party because we're halfway through. I also want to invite all of our Storytime parents, particularly to look into next Wednesday, July 6th, July 6th at 10:30. We have a partnership this year with our police and fire departments who are coming on the first Wednesday of each month for cookies with the first responder. So they come, they read books, they have story time with our kids, we have cookies, and then we adjourn to the parking lot for touch a truck. So even if you can't make story time, come out and touch the trucks, have cookies, meet your police and firefighters. So thank you. Come out to watch.
Great, that sounds great. Thank you, Stacy. Keep doing it at the library. Anybody else have any comments this evening? Okay, let's close the public hearing. And Mr. Regenstein, you and I had some discussion lately about what's happening in the park and the trees. I don't know if you want to touch briefly on that, kind of in response to
Sure.
residents' concerns.
I'd be happy to. As some of you, at least some of you will recall, about 3 years ago during one of our strategic planning sessions, you were presented with a plan for reforestation of a portion of the community park. Discussion there surrounded the invasives that had moved into the park and the fact that the park had become more of a camphor forest than a natural Florida forest. So we had a pretty extensive plan working along the south side of the park to reforest it. That has not made it into the budget yet. It's still a project that's sitting out there, but in the meantime, what we have done is gone out and on this budget year, we've had a number of complaints from users of the park, and our city staff has also noticed that there are a number of dangerous trees in the area. I think a few of us had that discussion this strategic planning session when we were out at the park, where we noticed some trees around the pavilions that were dead and had hangers in them. So we went out there and assessed the park and found a number of dangerous trees that were dying and needed to be removed for the safety of the residents. We also received some complaints along south side of the park where there were some trees overhanging the neighbors' houses that had some dangerous limbs hanging over. So we contracted to go out there, mark those trees, and have them removed. While we were doing that removal, we budget money every year for dangerous tree removal, so this is where the money came from. It really isn't a project, it's one of our operational line items. That there were some large camphor trees out there that are part of the problem, they are creating part of the problem with the natural ecosystem out there. So we had a couple of those removed also. Those are listed as invasive exotics by the state of Florida, and so this is sort of a two-phase. Number one, we're removing dangerous trees, and number two, we're removing some of the invasives. To follow up on that, we are doing a replanting plan. We already have 4 of the trees the vendor has approved, so they're going to be replaced tree for tree out there with native trees. We're going to have some Shumard oak, some sweet gum, sycamore, some of the more faster growing trees, and then we're going to follow up with some of the more slower growing trees, some of the more lethargic trees like the live oak. So we want to be able to create canopy as quickly as possible. We also want to create a nice balance for a nice urban forest out there. This is going to be ongoing, probably, as we talked about at the strategic planning session, this is probably a 20-year project. The ecosystem at the community park and the adjacent wetlands has gotten out of balance, and it's going to take some time to rebalance that. So we're going to do that over the next several years as far as removing dangerous trees and then replacing them with trees that fit more of a sandhill environment that we have out there. So that's what we're doing. That's what's going on right now. You'll probably see some of that happening over the next several years.
Okay. So this is really, I know I've been out there and there's a lot of deadfall and things just come down and you just walk by and think, well, thank God nobody's happened to be there when that came down. So I know there are a lot of dead trees out there that need to be removed. So this is more in the nature of removal of dead trees and incidental removal of invasives while you're out there.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a big project where we're reforesting.
No,
Okay.
no, and it always looks bad while it's going on. There still are some additional trees to be removed out there, but when we come back and do the restoration, we do in restoration with trees and native ground cover in the natural areas of the. So you'll see some softball metal going back in there, and some natural Florida ground covers to where the trucks have gone back and disturbed the area. So you'll see those replanted also.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
All right. Next order of business tonight is decisions. We have a couple of appointments to the Parks and Rec Board. And let's see. Laura, would you introduce the item for us?
We have 2 vacancies on the Parks and Rec Board. We're doing them one at a time. Ha Rhoda has turned out both were not eligible for reappointment, creating 1 vacancy. 4 residents submitted volunteer to serve applications. They were all included in the packet.
Okay, so we'll take them seat by seat. So we're talking about Ha Rhoda's seat. She's turned out. And we'll take nominations from the dais. I guess we have 4 potential, well, you nominate anybody you want, but we have 4 people who would like to serve on this board. So are there any nominations for this seat?
I'd like to nominate Andrew Smith.
That's a familiar name.
Mhm.
Okay. We have 1 nomination.
I'll nominate Mike Thomas for AC. I don't know what seat.
Okay.
Not sure how this. I'm confused by this process again.
Yeah, well, so we'll go through and everybody can nominate whoever they'd like for the first seat.
Do we do it by seat?
Yeah, and then the next one we'll go through and you can make all the same nominations again and or different ones that you like. There's no magic to it. Just seems to be a little more orderly and it kind of has to do with the rules that have been handed down to us from our forebears.
I'd like to nominate Colin Lilly.
Any other nominations? Okay, so we have 3, and then we will do this is Laura will poll each one of us, and each one of us will give one of these 3 names. And whoever is 3.
Remember, there will be 2.
Yeah.
So this is where this process gets, so this vote is for a seat, then we'll take nominations for the second seat, so we just all threw 3 people into 1 seat, which makes it.
We can throw on, yeah, we can do it again for the next seat.
It has to be a better way.
That's what I'm thinking, but.
Maybe we just don't want to do our 2 and then just see which.
These are the rules we have to play by,
We're
right?
each only saying, we're only playing 1 person.
Yeah.
You can say any of these 3 names that you like.
For this seat,
For
and
this
then we're
seat.
gonna have another seat that we can say the same 3 or different names.
Right, so Andrew Smith,
It'll be
Mike
fun.
Thomas,
This is
Colin
good.
Lilly.
But you have to get 3 people to say the same name?
In order to get, yes, this should be ordered.
This gets really interesting. Okay, let's play. I'm good. Let's go.
Do we roll dice too, or?
Anyone is welcome to remove their nomination and hold it for the second seat if they would like. Or I can call the names and we can see how we get to it.
Let's roll the dice.
I'll save Mike Thomas for the second seat.
So Mike, so we're down to 2. Any discussion on any of the candidates? Now we're down to 2. We can have discussion on candidates before we have the vote. If you'd like to do that.
You know what, I'm not gonna say about a candidate, but I was just telling Mr. Regentine, we have 3 people here that really want to come out and serve. I mean, two of them are here tonight. I'm sure the third one would have been here if he was in town, but, I mean, it almost, I just hate to see that there's only 2 spots. And then, you know, whoever doesn't get in, I hope that they do come back and please, you know, stay on the board. Look for a board, participate. I mean, this is where I think everybody on here pretty much got their start at, is doing board. So it's an important role. And, you know, sometimes I wish there was some kind of alternate that we could choose, but get all 3 of them in.
Right.
That's all I'm going to say. But thank you, guys. Thanks for applying.
Since I made the nomination for Mr. Smith, I'll just address that. I think, as Mayor Lowndes indicated, we probably all remember it, Mr. Smith was addressed us at when we did nominations and appointment for, yes.
Transportation.
Those acronyms, so telling, yes. And I think for Parks and Rec is especially well suited as offering a diverse set of opinions or perspectives to that board as someone who is obviously a resident of Maitland but new to this community and brings other perspectives, which I think is important, and has 2 young children and certainly uses these parks a lot. And so I think that in the spirit of not only stick-to-itiveness, which I think is a word, but also just a good perspective to have on parks.
Okay.
These are always tough for me when you don't know everybody that's on it. I appreciate that not having people get up and speak, because I went through that a few times, but it's also equally as awkward when you don't really know people, so you're sort of thinking. Anyway, that's just, there's a pro and con to all these things. Plus, like this naming system. Guys, pros and cons. But let's, like I said, there we go.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, we have 2 nominees, Andrew Smith, Colleen Lilling. As the clerk calls the name, or calls your name, would you please indicate which person you'd like to serve on
Councilmember Guthrie,
Lily.
Paul Harrison. Smith. Councilmember Wurzel,
Smith?
Councilmember Wild,
Colin Lilly.
Mayor Lowndes.
the board? Mr. Smith.
That was 3 for Andrew Smith and 2 for Colleen Lilly.
Okay, so Mr. Smith, you are our new Parks and Rec Advisory Board.
Thank you, I'm honored. As the former chair of Parks and Rec, I have a soft spot for PRAB, and I think that it's a really cool place to get a lot of fun stuff done. So good luck and enjoy it. It's a great group of people.
You'll have to let me know if it's like the television show.
I don't think you could ever be that good.
Okay, we have another seat, and let's go through the same process.
Jenny Wolf has served a term graciously, but she is not seeking to be reappointed at this time, creating our 2nd vacancy on Parks and Rec Advisory Board, and all 4 residents that submitted their applications were included in the packet.
Okay, let's open the floor for nominations for the 2nd seat on the Parks and Rec Board.
I would nominate Colleen Lilling.
Okay,
Put my comments back in there.
all right. Any other nominations? Seeing none, we're down to 2 on this one as well. So any discussion on this item, on these 2 candidates?
I think they're great candidates. I mean, you got somebody who, Mr. Thomas, who served on Lakes Advisory, Planning and Zoning, and City Council for 6 years, and then you have Colleen, who knows this area back and forth and has grown up. I don't know about grown up here, but been here many, many years, and has, you know, the energy and want to for the betterment of the town. So both of them, good people.
Yes.
Again, since we made the explanation for Ms. Lilling. We have heard from Ms. Lilling, all the members of council, from an email that we all received, very detailed explaining her reasons. To Councilman Wild's point, it's hard for me even if I do know who Mike Thomas is, I think we all do, but just in terms of what we're inferring versus what we're told specifically about their reasons for running. And I do have we all have reasons before us. Ms. Lilling has expressed about why, and obviously has demonstrated also great interest in serving this community.
Yes. Anybody else? Going to go again? Laura, would you please poll the council?
Councilmember Guthrie?
You wanted to go last?
I went first last time,
Yeah, Colleen Lilling.
Councilmember Hall Harrison?
Mike Thomas.
Councilmember Wurzel?
Colleen Lilling.
Councilmember Wild?
Do it again. So John can have all the power. Go Mike Thomas.
Mayor Lowndes?
I'll go with Mike Thomas. So Mr. Thomas is the second board member appointed. Thank you for everybody who is interested in this position, and thank you for your continued interest. I know that we need people to serve, and we'll find boards for everyone. All right. There are no more decisions tonight. We moved one, yes. We have consent item number 2. That is Lake Civilian Beach. Let's see. As background, Mr. Regentine, do you mind introducing that
Oh, sure.
item for us?
Sure, I'll be happy to jump in, and Jay can jump in if he sees me saying anything wrong, although I think I've backed on this one. If you all remember the FY22 CIP, and the Parks and Rec Master Plan, we're down to 3 parks that hadn't been touched in 2021. That was Hill Rec, where we had cost savings within the budget, so we were able to put the playground into Hill Rec, which then left 2 other parks that needed to be redone. One was Homer Huff Park at Sevilla Point, and the other one was Lake Sevilla Beach. In 2020, the City Council asked the Parks and Rec Board to reprioritize those 3 parks in terms of which one they wanted to see done first, and that was the priority, which was to get the low-hanging fruit with Hill Rec, then to redo the bathrooms and pavilion at Lake Sevilla Point, which was completed just this year. The next was, and really sort of the last as far as new amenities and the replacement of the bathroom, is Lake Sevilla Beach Park. So this was budgeted in this fiscal year. The design will take through this fiscal year into next. Jay has plans to apply for a grant to assist with this funding, most likely in 2024. As the staff report says, there are a number of amenities we're looking at. First of all, we're looking at a replacement of the existing bathroom, new kayak paddleboard launch onto Lake Sevilla, temporary pull-off, so that would be on the west side of the road at where the kayak dock would be, so you could just unload your stuff right there on that side, not have to cross traffic and then put it in the water. ADA improvements to the picnic area with some amenities added to the picnic area, and extension of the pedestrian walkway along that portion of Lake Sevilla to at least be consistent with the bike ped master plan. So we had CPH, which is one of our consulting engineers, provide a proposal to us, and that is for $69,870 to do the design phase of this project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Regentine. Any questions or comments for Mr. Regentine?
I talked to Mark earlier about, my concerns. One was that price of $70,000. I was concerned if that was a little high. He came back, said, in fact, it was probably a little lower than he thought it would be. And then, I don't know if everybody saw it, there's a letter here in your emails from Julie Roach. She's a yoga instructor, does paddleboard yoga. You see her out on Lake Sibilia all the time. She has some concerns about, about the natural vegetation and fish and everything and the shoreline. And she also had concerns about making that so active with kids running across the road and being a high traffic area, that she thought Homer Huff would be a better place to put these things. I also had some questions about the launch. I've always had a paddleboard and kayaks, and I just take them and throw them in the water and jump in them or jump on top of them. So I was just kind of concerned about, is that a price that is that money that we're just kind of just doing it to put it there, and does it just sit there and get no use? Would it be better, that launch be better at Homer Huff? So those were my concerns today.
Anybody else? Council have any question on that? So I guess it is a small dock that would be the launch area for the kayak and paddleboard?
That's the proposal, yes.
Is that, I guess, well, we wouldn't know what percentage of the contract that would be.
No, not this one.
Design. Okay. There was a comment when we opened it up to the public, and anybody from the public would like to address us on this, please do.
I'm sure I can add to what I've already heard. No, I can't. Dale McDonald, 108 Angela Ford, and I can always add. The realities here are that I see a lot of duplication here. Obviously, what we have at Sibilia Point, to be able to ADA the picnic area at Sibilia Point is fundamental. It goes without saying, we've already redone a bathroom there. Now, granted, we need a new bathroom down here. No question. That's a given. I've actually been in it, and none of you ever want to go in it, if you can avoid it. I'm wondering if we're just duplicating what we already have a mile away. Okay? As I continue to consider the bigger picture, is some of this money better spent on getting ourselves sidewalks around the south side of Lake Sibilia? We know we can do it when we have the will. John, you've been around it all, you know the deal. So, this is not brain surgery. We just have to do it. I'm not sure that the limited amount, because there's a great deal of, as Vance pointed out, the lady doing her paddleboarding, yoga on paddleboard. We've seen her do it, and it's certainly never inhibited her at all to be able to get her paddleboard in and out of Lake Sibilia from the east side, from that location. So, can we make use a park that I'd love to rename and become Lake Sibilia Point, period. But this year last one we've already spent. We just spent a bunch of money redoing those bathrooms. We've got a play set. We've got parking. We've got so many things already there in great shape. So that was my thought. And wanted that to, was a little frustrated to see it on the consent. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Does anybody else like to address council on this matter? Seeing none, let's close the public period and bring it back up to council.
Lindsay, was this ever discussed when you were on?
Well, that was exactly what I was just going to bring up, was the Parks Master Plan and how these were actually plotted out and how these were decided as different issues that needed to be addressed and the timing of them. So Mark's the historian here to give us a reminder lesson, but can you go back and kind of rephrase it again?
Oh, sure. I believe it was in 2020 that we had these last 3 projects done. And at that time, when PRAP set the priorities that we have in the capital projects right now, we had this very same discussion on Sibilia Point versus Sibilia Beach and where a kayak launch would be best placed. And during that discussion, there were a number of options that were brought out. If you put the kayak launch at Sibilia Point, it's a much longer run to get down there. It's a steeper run, so ADA accessibility is going to be a challenge. So you still have to put something out there from an accessibility standpoint, because once you make an improvement, it has to be accessible. So with the decision that the city council made, it made more sense to make the improvements to Sibilia Beach, because you can put the pole off there. It's a shorter walk to get down to the lake, and the bathroom has been in need of replacement for years, ever since Irma. When the tree fell on it, it had to be closed down for a year. I mean, we put it back together, so it's usable, but I would agree with Mr. McDonald that it's not the place you want to take family or children if you had another option. But it does get used. I've been out there a few evenings where I've been able to. I'm kind of a nerd. All right, I was out there. I think I've told Guppy this. I'm out there watching a comet with my telescope. So I was out there for 4 nights, and a lot of people do walk around Lake Sibilia, and there was at least a dozen each night that would walk around and stop into the restroom for their break before they would continue around it. So the park does get used, and this would just help to activate a little bit, address some accessibility issues, and that's the reasoning behind why the priorities were established this way. And Sibilia Beach ended up being the last priority. It was the last park of those 3, because as far as major improvements, it was the last to be done, so it was prioritized as the last park to do before we start going back and redoing other parks. So
with that being said, yes, PRAB did talk about it, and we did, as part of the Parks Master Plan, it was listed out the improvements that we wanted to see, and those were discussed as priorities for amenities to be added or amenities to be improved. So that was all done and codified long ago. So this is just putting through the timeline the things that had already been decided to be done.
I mean, Dale makes a good point. I mean, there's obviously resources, because I was just checking on the map, and the sidewalks do end there. I don't know, you have to, I'm assuming you have to continue it. It's not like you can make the move around Lake Sibilia. You'd have to then go down south towards Birds of Prey if you were going to make a meaningful sidewalk improvement. But the bathrooms, I've been by there, not inside them, and it seems like we have to make a decision, either knock them down or renovate them. So, and I just don't know about the use of that park from a launch standpoint. I don't know if we looked at that from a PRAP standpoint as to how many people truly use that as a kayak launch.
Well, one could argue that we are encouraging use by improving things, and I don't necessarily find persuasive ideas that like these things are mutually exclusive. It sounds like from what Mark is saying that there were considerations made by PRAB about why Lake Sibilia Beach versus Homer Huff specifically for certain features, but and I don't know what percentage of this budget is going to the kayak launch versus the bathrooms. I would assume bathrooms are probably the most expensive piece of that. And so to me, part of the idea is to make all of our parks at a baseline. That's part of the park improvement plan purpose, right? To get them baseline before we, do fancier things progressively. To the people who live near Lake Sibilia, they probably would value having their park be just as nice as Fort Maitland Park or versus, Lake Minnehaha or what have you. So I don't personally think that just because we have paddleboard launches other places, that's a reason not to do it in a different place.
It was actually one of our priorities to add more paddleboard launches as specifically. So that was one of the reasons that we were so intentional about wanting to have that in Fort Maitland Park and why we were so intentional about wanting to make sure that we had others, because one of the things that we had talked about right around the time I actually came on to PRAB was that, Minnehaha should have had a paddleboard launch and didn't end up with one. So it was like, okay, where else is a good fit for adding access to our lakes that we don't currently have it? And one of the problems with Homer Hub, that we all know, is that the parking lot is actually kind of far away from the water. So if you're having to drag a paddleboard all that way, or a kayak, that's a lot further than it is to go from the parking lot crossing over right to that launch spot that's going to, that was slated to be created. So that was part of the intentional, like, hey, here's a really good access point to our lakes. The city owns the land. This is not a big stretch to do that.
I think also another point that many of the people who come to me that are advocates for our lakes, specifically whether they're on Lakes Advisory Board or just interested citizens in our lake, point to this specific lake a lot for wanting to be cleaned up, and I've heard us talk about that before up here. And it's come up that part of getting people in town interested in our lakes and the health of them and seeing what's going on in them is encouraging them to access each of those. So the more, from my perspective, the more education is key, so the more we encourage people to use those lakes, the more that hopefully they'll become invested in the quality of those lakes as well.
No, and I agree with you. Mine wasn't really, if we have it or not, is it better served at Homer Huff than it is at that point, because, you already have back to it, you already have the playgrounds, you already have, the parking, it's nice, quiet, you don't have to worry about your kids crossing the road. They're contained in that big lot, so it's a nice, safe spot. So that was just kind of where I was going with it.
Okay. Yeah, I like the idea of more paddleboard, kayak launch ability. In that area is, that park there, you wouldn't even really know it was a park. You wouldn't know that it was necessarily owned by the city. It's kind of fell into disuse. It just doesn't have a nice vista of the lake. I think part of the plan is to limb up some of the trees that are in there so you actually can see the lake. But if you go a little bit further down and see Asbury Methodist Church and what they've done with the access to the lake there is phenomenal. What public property should also offer some of those amenities to that. So,
And what do we get for that $70,000? What does that get us, Mark?
That gets you a full set of construction plans ready for permitting.
So that's full plans.
Yep.
So from an architectural engineering standpoint, there'd be no other costs, just be straight to bid.
So, Mike, I'm interested in your thought. Is that when I talked to Mr. Regenstein today, that's a good price on that? Good pricing, you would say?
I guess it depends on what's a little bit unknown on that, is that you don't really know what you're asking for yet, right? I mean, we're asking for a bathroom, and what engineering plans on retention, Mark, and it's hard to know if the number's fair if I don't know exactly what the ask was.
We have about $500,000 budgeted for the construction phase of this, and sort of the rule of thumb that we've used for the last several years from a design perspective versus a capital cost expensive perspective is the design costs usually run between 10 and 15% of construction costs. And we've seen them run a little bit higher lately on the design side for whatever reason. So this falls within that as a parameter, if that's any help to you. It's so hard right now with the way construction is going, and between materials and actually finding contractors and inflation, construction is a real challenge.
So
right
is
now.
taking something off one of these bullet points hypothetically, such as a kayak launch, does that really save any money in the design fee, or is that more an issue of not wanting plans that don't represent the ultimate design we would want executed?
I have to look at the contract to see how it's broken out as far as design. That's
I mean, it might be a slight,
Yeah.
but I assume
construction is the bigger number on everything by far. Yes.
Part of the landscape and hardscape improvements, that's going to be to the parking lot as well, right, next to it?
Yep.
And with A&H building out down that way, it actually makes sense to make those improvements, because then it's going to activate that entire area.
That bathroom gets locked, I assume.
by park staff at
9 o'clock, Jay? 10 o'clock?
So for the paddleboard launch, I think, was somebody saying we're doing a small little, are we building a little dock?
Yeah, we would be looking at putting an accessible dock out there. It doesn't make sense to put an accessible walkway down there without having an accessible dock area. So it's the same thing we did at Fort Maitland.
So it'd be 10 foot wide by,
Whatever the
Whatever it is.
going to be, we'll have the designer
Mhm.
put that together. But you've seen, especially you've seen paddleboard kayak
Right.
launches. Yeah.
right.
Okay. Anybody interested in a motion on this one?
I will make the motion to authorize the interim city manager to enter into contract with CPH for the design of improvements to Steely Beach Park.
Motion. Second.
I second.
Motion and a second, Laura, would you call the
Can I have one question?
Sure.
So this will come back, Mark, as after it's designed, it'll come back for a vote on the acceptance of the design, or no?
It'll come back before we put it out to bid, so you'll see the final design.
Okay. Laura, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Guthrie?
Aye.
Councilmember Hall Harrison?
Aye.
Councilmember Worsel?
Aye.
Councilmember Wild?
Aye.
Mayor Loudon?
Aye. Okay, so we have a complete consent agenda now, it's not on consent, but fully discussed. So now we're into the discussion phase for our evening. Mark, you want to talk about the 2023 strategic priorities?
Yeah, just briefly, as you all know, on April 28th, we had our half-day strategic planning session to look at the upcoming budget priorities and CIP process. We came back with the priorities on May 23rd, and as we discussed the strategic priorities, there was clearly some confusion on behalf of staff as to what those priorities would be. So
It's very generous of you, Mark.
we decided that probably the best course of action was decided at that meeting was to have another bite at the apple. So we put together another spreadsheet and sent the priorities back out to City Council. This time we did at the strategic planning session. We requested the top 3 priorities. This time we requested the top 5 to see where the priorities really fell. And as a result of that, you can see where the numbers fell in terms of the priorities that the City Council provided to us, with number 1 being Independence Lane, number 2 being tied to, actually 3-way tied for 2, with library, walkabilities, trail crossing, 1792 bike ped issues, septic to sewer conversion, and then coming in 3rd place after the ties at 2nd, urban forestry. As you all know, these priorities are included within our either our capital plan or our policy plan, and as are most of the priorities that are on this list. So in terms of what we look at, as far as the entry features, they're still a project out there. We've done some initial design work on those. That's one of those projects that I'm having to reassign based upon workload. Lake quality, obviously, through the budget, lake quality is always an issue. We have our lake management department out working on the water quality. Staffing is something that we as department heads are looking at all the time, every year. So that's going to be included in here. Undergrounding master plan is being put together right now in terms of scope of services so we can have a citywide undergrounding master plan. So that's going to be continuing to move forward. We always take, as far as downtown redevelopment, we have our redevelopment plan, and we're always assessing that in terms of how new development will occur in the context of what we're doing from a capital standpoint. Dog park is there because it was there in 2022. There wasn't a whole lot of support for dog park this time around. And quite frankly, dog park's a challenge with the park property we have to designate a larger area of a park for a dog park, but there wasn't a lot of support for that this time around. Maintaining our parks is something we do as part of our annual budget process, the operating side of it. So, the septic sewer conversion, we have a grant that's going to help fund the future phases of that, so that's out there. And sidewalk implementation, we put money in the budget every year for sidewalks. These next few years are going to be focusing on the areas where the sewer lines are going in to get sidewalks in that area. So of all these are things we're working on. The only one that came in new this year was the splash pad. So that was the only one that deviated significantly. And that can be worked in the future depending on the direction that I receive from the city council. But our top priorities are aligned with where they were last year. And I'll be carrying those forward in the proposed budget as Jerry and I, department heads, put that together over the next couple of weeks. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, and this was really an exercise, both for the council and for you, to make sure that you, as head of staff, are executing what the priorities of the council are. So you want us to articulate them, and do you feel they were better articulated this time?
Yes.
Okay. You feel better about that?
I do feel, yeah, I was. Everyone was concerned about the originals that came through on the direction we're going to go, which begged further discussion. So I think the clarification here certainly provides us the direction we need to move forward.
Okay, and this was the product of us spending 3 or 4 hours debating it, and so we've all been through this before. I don't know if anybody has any more. Anybody have any comment about?
Just thank you for the mulligan and re-instructions, and also appreciated the ability to have 5 instead of 3. It was helpful for my brain. But I guess also just for transparency purposes, which we did discuss at the last meeting, or one of the last meetings, why we were redoing them, but essentially, making sure that even if something is already talked about being funded or currently funded, that it still needs to be a priority to continue to be funded. And then I got to still add on things like my entry features, which I will claim proudly. So.
Thank you.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
I just like it that I think we're pretty much all on board. That's the great thing that I see here.
That certainly makes our lives easier
Yeah.
from a senior staff standpoint.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, could you excuse me? I made an error when I spoke at the end of that. I thought that was the end of the public period. And I know that there's a lady here who wanted to speak in the public period, and I shut her out because I thought that was the end of the public period. I heard you wrong.
Oh, yeah, the public period that we have after you all entered was for a particular item. So we had already passed the general public period where you can speak on an item. But does anybody have, as a matter of discretion, to allow a 3-minute reopening of the public period? Can we find it in our hearts?
Yeah, I got no problem.
All right, on the mayor's prerogative, we'll open the public period for anybody who has, this is the part where you can speak to us about an item that perhaps was not on the public. Yeah, I think we're done with the discussion items, so we're going to open up the public hearing.
You got Fort Maitland.
This is my correct.
And we're still going to Fort Maitland Park next. Yes, I'm just going to do this real fast. Just.
Real fast is right. Thank you for opening this up. Sam Levin, 692 Mayo Avenue. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for your service to the community. My wife is a walker. She walks 7 miles a day. And one of the places she walks to is the park at the end of our street on Mayo. And she saw trees getting knocked down and kind of upset her, but she looked into it and the trees were camphor trees. And she said, okay, they're invasive, that's fine. Then she started seeing other trees get knocked down. And she tried really hard to get answers from the city on what was happening. She couldn't quite find the back to scratch. She couldn't quite find where to go. And miracle of miracles. Today she got an email from somebody saying, I have your answers. So unless we can't get the answers from that email, we'll come back. In the meantime, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Logan. Yes, and I assumed that you all were here on that item, and we had some discussion with the city manager afterwards, and after the meeting, I'm sure everybody's available to answer your questions. But thank you. Okay, let's close public hearing with some, yes. And we'll move on to the next discussion item, which was the Fort Maitland parking, which I'm sure we'll some quickness to deal with this very easy issue. All right. So,
Why are we all laughing?
Mark, would you introduce the item?
Absolutely. I gave you some background on the history in my staff report. I don't feel it's probably necessary to go through that unless anybody would like me to see how we got here. I can sort of just pick up at the end. Basically, we went through several iterations of determining what the design was going to be for Fort Maitland, which ended up being the design that I included into your agenda packet. Key for tonight's discussion, and the one that's up there on the board right now. The 13 boat parking spaces. As we went through the design workshop and approved the final design before we went to construction, there was one outstanding issue that was laid out, and that is how we're going to handle parking at Fort Maitland. There were a number of different ideas that have been discussed over the last couple of years that primarily focused on resident versus non-resident parking. And I have included a court case that we found ourselves embroiled in the early 1980s regarding this very issue that sort of has guided us since then, and that's the fact that we did make the old Fort Maitland parking exclusive to city residents. We were sued by the Orlando Bassmasters Association claiming discrimination between residents and non-residents. I've included a basic synopsis of that case in your packet. Bassmasters prevailed in circuit court, finding that the resident-only parking was discriminatory. The city appealed that to the 5th District Court of Appeals. The appeals court upheld the lower court's ruling. The city then did appeal it to the Florida Supreme Court, but they denied a petition for review. So that would be the case law that surrounds this very particular issue. So following that, the restrictions regarding resident and non-resident parking were lifted. So it's been a first-come, first-served situation down there. But with the redesign and rethinking of Fort Maitland, the issues come up again. So what I'm looking for tonight is some direction on how we'd like to go. Where we left this was the issue of parking is not a design issue, it's a policy issue. It's an ordinance and it's sign manufacturing out there. So if we do want to restrict the parking, all of it or some of it for residents only, the sort of direction I need to craft an ordinance is it going to be all or nothing? Is it going to be a portion of it? If it's a portion of the parking, what portion of the parking do we want it to be? How is it going to work? Is it just for weekends, which are our busiest times? Weekdays are not that busy, even during season down there, weekends and holidays. Or we're going to leave it as it is. So we sort of left that sitting out there for a discussion, but what we would like to do, what we've always wanted to do, is when we come back and open the park, we have a policy in place so we're not changing the rules on the people when they start using the park again. So I have discussed this issue with Jacob and Cliff, and the last discussion I had with Jacob this afternoon was that we should tread lightly at least on resident-only parking. He can certainly expound on his and Cliff's interpretation of what's happened in the past and how it applies today, but we should just be careful as we move forward in terms of restricting parking. So I'm just looking for some direction tonight. We can craft whatever ordinance you want and get it back in front of you for adoption prior to the opening of the park in September.
Okay.
Everything goes well.
So I think we're just summarize perhaps, I mean, so there has been some idea, I mean, this is a long debated topic among us, and I think there is some legal peril in restricting spaces for Maitland residents. And if we want to do that, we're going to be taking a risk. It could be a costly risk, or is this something we really want to do in any case? I think what we're going to have down there is 13 spaces, highly patrolled. I know that we've talked about, police presence down there, and also, passive ways to make sure that there are just 13 boat traps parked there at any one time. So rather than having kind of the melee that had been going on for years down there. So that's my main concern is, to make sure that when we have 13 spaces, that there is not 14 trailers in that park. I would like to prefer Maitland residents to, for these spaces, but if we're going to run afoul of the state constitution, or we risk running afoul of the state constitution based on historical experience, we might want to tread lightly on that. I mean, there are other ways also of perhaps having a differential treatment of Maitland residents versus non-Maitland residents on cost of parking there. Of course, that would add an administrative burden. We'd have to figure out how to sign that, how to decal that, how to make sure that the police know at any given time who is a resident, who is not. And that brings its own complications. So with that said, my inclination is really just to leave it as it has been, which is for the last, since 1980, which is a first come, first served trailer parking there for 13 spaces, and make sure that 13 means 13. I think it's a little too cumbersome and perhaps risky to try to circumvent the Constitution. That's a hard word. Let's say massage the Constitution to make sure that we can prefer our own residents on this. That's my view on it. But anybody else have a view?
That rant, so before we closed down, and I think the police who went out there with them, there were sometimes, and I was telling Mark today, I don't remember, we've all counted, and I had over 20. I don't know, Chief, what the most has ever been there, but if you used to pull into the swales, they would park on the sides, they would park almost down to the water. So going from that to 13 on a Saturday in May is going to be disturbing for some, and I know that a lot of people come in from out of town, but there's also a lot of people from Maitland who come and use that with their families. So I am fearful that, I'm sure we've all heard this, that the net effect of doing this is just reducing the ability for people who don't live on a lake to get on the lake. And I think the lakes get crowded. There were times there when I was there and we'd go out on Lake Maitland and there were just too many people on Lake Maitland when all these people would, and there was erratic behavior and it was sometimes dangerous. So I do get the desire to reduce the amount of traffic on the lake, but I do think that not doing anything, it's going to be that first Saturday in May when we open back, or whenever we open this back up, it's going to be a tough reality for people that there's going to be a lot of people who live in Maitland who are not going to find a spot. And I think it's unfortunate. I wish there was something we could do. I think, I was talking to Mark about it, I think that we should look at potentially having spaces that maybe could be for annual pass holders only. So essentially you had on certain days of the week, and I was talking to Mark about this, you're really only talking about Saturdays and Sundays, and you're probably only talking about Saturdays and Sundays during sort of what you would consider the peak recreational times. So I don't know if you could try to have spots that were trailer parking for only annual pass holders, and then making annual passes distinctly different for residents versus non-residents, meaning could there be a cost differential that is made where people who come down for the day, who are paying less money, coming in for the day, are not going to be able to park in those designated spaces. that the residents typically in Maitland are going to buy or are going to get the annual pass holder. That's my thought.
So tonight is PREP night, I guess. I'm going to put my PREP hat back on. Because this conversation we did have in PREP when we were trying to figure out how to put the park together. And the big, is it going to be a boat parking lot or a park with a boat ramp? And which way did we want to go with the design? And one of the things that did come up and that we did talk about actively was monetizing those parking spots and the ability to charge a fee for those parking spaces. And it is completely within our rights to charge a fee and then to discount that fee for residents, correct?
I can get more into that, but there's recent case law indicating you can either discount it or, yes, only charge out of town
Right.
people. So it's not risk-free. There's certainly case law supporting that.
You know, if anybody goes over to Volusia County and wants to go on the beach, that there's one rate for Volusia County residents to access parking on the beach and a different rate for non-residents. That certainly stands true in a lot of other scenarios, and I think that given how much we have spent as a city to improve this park and to turn it into a real destination and also something that we want to encourage our residents to be able to have access to. My suggestion to Mark when we talked about this was, I think we charge $25 for a parking spot. And if you are a resident, you can go and pick up a placard or a decal from City Hall. You prove your residency, you attach it to your license plate, and it becomes your free pass to be able to park in those spots. If you are a non-resident, you don't live in the city of Maitland, we are more than happy to take your money, and you can come and have a parking spot and put your trailer in one of those spots. But it does two things. One, it raises some money for our city to offset the cost of having to have police out there on the weekends patrolling, making sure that people are doing the right thing and behaving themselves. But it also, I think, is an opportunity for us to recoup some of the cost of what we have invested into this park, while also maybe acting as a deterrent for people who see $25 or some other number to be something they don't want to pay, and maybe they go find somewhere else that is free for them to launch their boats. But our Maitland residents would be able to have free access to those parking spaces. We wouldn't charge them. And then they would be able to access those parking spaces at least and have a fair shot of being able to get into one of them. So I like the idea of charging for those spaces. I think that we should at least try and monetize it, recoup some of our cost. You know, people are used to paying for parking at theme parks, paying for parking at events and venues. People want to get onto our lake and they want to have access. If we have gone through the cost and the time of improving that park for the benefit of everyone in the community, well, I don't see any harm in us charging for the spots to be able to be used.
So if we were to do either one, charging or pass holder, enforcement of this, what does that look like? I mean, is that something that we're prepared to do, Mark? I mean, is that, before we dream up ideas, are we ready to have police presence there?
Well, we're always ready to have police presence there. From an enforcement standpoint, we always talked about when it reopens to have a police presence down there to ensure that people aren't parking where they're not supposed to be. So that was always part of the plan. And so I talked with the chief and his command staff about that. So that was going to happen. In terms of resident annual pass holder only parking, that from an implementation standpoint is a little more straightforward because Maitland residents come to Community Park to get their annual passes. They can be given their sticker for their boat, a sticker for their trailer, and this has actually been done before. I talked to Dave about this. We used to have resident stickers for their boat trailers. So that makes enforcement there easy if you're going to have designated spaces for annual pass holders, just from a purely enforcement standpoint. So logistically, that's easier. From a metered parking standpoint, I'd have to get with Jay. I talked with him briefly today about it, and I talked a little bit with Jacob today about it. We have to put a little more thought into how we would implement that, and how it could be implemented if you want to, prior to opening the park. So,
I mean, here's the thought. I mean, one, boat ramps are not, I mean, they're a stressful place. If you ever driven a boat, I mean, backing the boat up, people are sometimes, I'm just trying to avoid confrontation. I mean, you don't want to set the police up for having to go and confront potentially people who are not in a good spot, and you just, so I'm trying to think of ways you can do this, but also avoid confrontation, and that's the parking thing. I mean, can we have only residents are able to get annual passes? Could you?
That's what we can't do, is limiting the access to the lake, right?
You can't limit, well, what we recommend against is doing the exact same thing that happened. Because there are reasons to think that reasoning isn't correct anymore.
The
that
precedent might
appellate
still
court used.
exist.
But there's a case saying that Fort Maine you can't prohibit residents from parking.
So, yeah,
But having like an annual pass where annual pass holders don't get charged, there's better support for that.
And could you have well, what I'm saying is, could you make it such that if you don't live in the city of Maitland, you can only apply for a day pass? You can still get on the lake, but you can only get a day pass.
So how about this scenario? Because I see this at Cocoa Beach. You go to Cocoa Beach and they have meters. You got to feed those, but I've never liked those. I like it like downtown Orlando. You have an app, you go on the app, you put in, how long you want to be there, and it charges. So in Cocoa Beach, if you're a resident, you go down, you get a sticker, and you put it on your car, and you can park at any of the beach accesses you want, and you won't get ticketed. You can stay as long as you want, and that's how they do it there. And then, to Lindsay's point in Volusia, what they do is $40 if you're a resident or a homeowner, and then $110 if you're not. So, so both case scenarios there work, but I kind of like the Cocoa Beach version. And then I want to come back after we have this discussion and talk about what I'm seeing here and some of the problems that we had talked about, that we have parking areas and some green space where cars can get on. So after this discussion, I'd like to.
Well, I have the fortunate position from my perspective of coming to you after much of the difficult parts of this conversation in terms of joining council, and a lot of the concerns, it seems, are not really up for, the design or things like that are not really what we're here to discuss, because that has already been decided previously. That to me, if the issue is, and I agree with what Councilman Wild is saying in the sense of making sure that we have access to lakes for people who essentially don't have the privilege of living on a lake or knowing someone who does, and that there are very few ways to access chain of lakes. One of them is the Racket Club, kind of the same situation. It's a members only club. So because of that, if you limit to, you have to have an annual pass without any financial breaks for residents, then to me, it's sort of the same problem of now it's something someone has to pay for additionally to access and get preference on that alone. What Councilwoman Hall Harrison is mentioning, if that was legally feasible, because like Mayor Lowndes, I wouldn't personally be apt to go against the suggestion of our attorneys, that you can have a different path, kind of like the Cocoa Beach example or whatever, that we can distinguish parking, not the number of spaces assigned, but just sort of your access. It's still not going to directly address this issue of making sure that residents have a spot or a better chance of getting a spot, but I think it makes me feel better, at least, that we're acknowledging the interest of our residents at this Maitland Park, and it's sort of a nice suggestion from my standpoint, if that's altogether feasible. I also wanted to raise another thing that's mentioned in here, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate for this discussion, but also to this idea of what's been, I've never been there, because I don't do boats unless I'm on somebody else's and they're driving and taking care of it. But, so I don't know, but it sounds like this very lawless situation. So the violation fee, I don't know if that, I see that mentioned in the memo. Personally, if people are running afoul of rules that are clearly posted and we have someone there to enforce them, like $25 is really low in my opinion. And that's someplace I'm very happy to personally to recoup funds on, is people who are breaking rules in a way that sounds disrespectful from the way that it's phrased. So that's another point that I want to
Go ahead.
Oh, if you have something to add.
Well, so all residents pay a fee, so no matter what, you go out to the boat, to go to the Chain of Lakes, you gotta get a pass to do it. So you're paying money no matter what. And I would say most people, I haven't done the math, but I would guess that most people who have a boat in Maitland who would use that park, if you live in Maitland and you have a boat, you probably get an annual pass. So it's, I don't think, by saying annual pass parking, I don't think we'd be adding.
But it's not benefiting Maitland residents specifically by saying just if they have an annual boat pass.
You would, because I would make the annual pass only available to Maitland
But I
residents.
thought that's what we can't do.
That's actually,
The thing you can't do is limit access.
Right, but if
So-
that access is contingent upon having a,
you can get a day pass.
So.
I'm not limiting access because you can get it. Here's the thing, I also want to be careful about these discussions that we don't like shoot our own arguments down before in a forum like this. So I feel like we should toss out some ideas and maybe have staff and whatever look at it. I would think one idea, and look, I'm not saying it's a good idea, but an idea is to say the first space, all the spaces up to the handicap space would be for annual pass holders only. Annual pass holders are only, you can only get an annual pass via the city resident. Therefore, when you go get your annual pass, you get a sticker, you put it on the back of your trailer. It's easy to enforce. They don't have to go get a separate one. It's not like a feed the meter where you have to get some other mechanism to track it. And then the 3 spaces north and west of the handicap space become day pass parking. And that would only, I think you only would need to do this on Saturdays and Sundays and holidays. And I think that you wouldn't have to worry about this other than those days. And so you would designate those as annual pass holder parkings. And if you just want to make it easy and say Saturdays and Sundays, then obviously it would be great if you could deal with the July and Memorial Days or whatever. But I think in a general statement, if you could just say Saturdays and Sundays and you're not limiting access, you would still have the ability to have daily passes to get out there. But the city of Maitland residents who are worried about parking would have the ability to get parking spaces. And look, I'm throwing out up to the handicap. If that's not the right number, then fine. But that would be a thought.
Well, here's another one of the things that we talked about last time that I don't see in here. And there's a couple things we talked about that I don't see in here. But one of them was a designated spot for police, emergency, whatever. I mean, that's not included in this. So if somebody needs help or something, we need to get the boat down there. There's not a place to park it.
Well, from that perspective, we did have that discussion unless anything's changed. If you need to get a police or fire boat into the water, they're getting it in the water, they're parking, they are an emergency vehicle. They're going to take care of the emergency versus worrying about folks getting into the water. I mean, it's just like
So
when
they
the
just
fire
pull up on the side?
department pulls in front of my house and the street's blocked, the fire department pulls in front of my house and the street's blocked. That's the priority. You could designate a spot for emergency vehicles and it just takes it off the map. And when we're out there for patrols, it reserves the space. I mean, there's no harm in that. But from an emergency standpoint, we need to get primarily a fire boat in the water, a police boat in the water. They put it in the water and then pull it out and they go take care of their business. On normal patrols during the high season, you certainly designate a spot for the police tow vehicle and boat trailer down there.
So when we do
Not
launch
unheard of.
down, where will the police tow vehicle go park? When they launch, where will it go? On Saturday, like where will the police tow vehicle go after they've launched the boat? Do we have a?
Not right now, not designated without even walking.
But do we know where, if it's all full, when they go out, where will they go? Is there a?
Well, let's focus on what we're about here.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out enforcement of all this. I mean, it's, anyway,
Yeah, no,
I'm just trying to figure out how we enforce it.
okay, yeah, and that's, enforcement is going to be the key. I mean, I understand the past and, you know, as I understand now, these things are all virtual, so there's no actual decals anymore. They're just like,
No, there are annual passes.
annual
Yeah.
passes is the exception,
Yes.
so that would make it easier to do that.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes.
But I'm tying it all to an annual pass because there's already a process in place for it. That's what, I'm trying to not add another layer, but give
Right.
us something.
Right. So what you could do is you're saying, okay, either make that pass free or discounted on a COCO type basis. You know, it's $40 for Maitland residents and $110 for people otherwise, and you know, these spaces are dedicated to annual pass holders. Nobody in the park.
But if you say only city residents, and Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, only city residents can get an annual pass. You must have an annual pass to access these parking spots. Are you not then limiting spots to residents only?
Right, it sounds like
A
that
logical
proposal would
chain.
at least
Ergo.
partially, at least some of the spots would then be limited to residents.
It would still be, I mean, but if you did first come, first served, then it wouldn't be problematic.
This is why my idea of metering the spots makes sense, because then you're distinguishing, every spot is metered. The only difference is some people are paying for that metered spot and some people aren't. And that in and of itself does not create the issue, because all of the spots are metered. Some people are paying for the metered spots, some people have a discount pass not to pay for them, just like your COGO.
In a way, the residents are paying because they pay taxes. And those
Well, yes,
taxes
exactly, right.
paid
That
for
is
them
the benefit
all.
of residency versus non-residency.
So how would you set up a meter?
Excellent question, Mr. Wild.
So we
That was
talked about
something we'd
this
have
this
to look
morning.
into.
I mean, it's, you know, it would require some implementation. But if we've got 13 spots and we're charging $25 a spot, and let's say it turns over twice in the day, that's $600 on a Saturday that we could make. That's $1,200 on a weekend, theoretically, right? That would be a great number. Obviously, it would be less than that, but you know what? That's going to cover the cost of having somebody out there to enforce it. We'd have to put in either one of those pay-per-ticket meter machines, or we could get one of those apps like Vance was saying, that does downtown. We talked about that this morning, that, you know, you get one where every sign has its own designated number, and you dial it into the app, and you pay for it right there on the spot, and then whoever is enforcing parking has it on their app, and they walk up behind it, and they see that that spot is attached to that license plate number, and you can confirm right there on the spot that that person has paid.
I'm all for it. I mean, there's a,
Yeah,
if there's a mechanism, I just don't know what that looks like.
I don't know what it is either, but I have time to look into it. They all have this discussion.
Is that kind of, to Mr. Wild's comment, is that something that we should do, just give some direction on
Yeah.
this and say,
Yeah.
would you look at this, and then also this we're interested in?
And I like your idea. I like the idea. I was trying to think within the confines of what we already have.
Yeah.
You're adding a layer. If adding that layer doesn't cost that much money and it's enforceable, then I'm all for it. I'm just, like I said, it's just, this is a,
I mean, I feel like those apps these days, you know, they even build in administrative fees and stuff. So if a person who's paying for the parking is also paying the administrative fee for the actual transaction, then I don't know what the cost of the city would be, but I would certainly assume we would recoup it based on the parking fees that we would actually be able to.
I would imagine it would be a vendor, probably, a vendor who has the expertise to do that. The question would be, is it worth it to a vendor to come out with 13 spaces? But if it is, it is. I mean, we can look into that and see. And, you know, so they would take whatever their chunk of the
and just one last thing, John. Before, the only reason why I think this is, why we have to speed this up is that we've got a reset opportunity. The park is now going to reopen. And I wouldn't want to reopen this park and then change the rules after the fact. So if we're going to do it now, in my opinion, now is the time to do this. And so this is the time.
Right. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that was driving us to be expeditious about this earlier is we thought it might require an ordinance, and that, of course, is going to require a few readings. I don't think this is going to require an ordinance. This is going to be an administrative way to handle this. So why don't we do this? Why don't we ask Mr. Regentine, who has, I understand, lots of time, to find somebody among his staff who can come back and report to him about the possibilities that Lindsay brings up and that Mike brings up on, do we want to, and get with, of course, Jacob to find out where we are constitutionally on looking at that way. There are a couple other, and I'm sure you all talked to Mark as well. I mean, some of this might I guess we cost share on weed control and vegetation control
Yeah.
with the City of Winter Park, and some of that funding is state funding, and so they have equal protection type of a requirement for that as well. So we might want to make sure that we're not giving up all our weed control or our relationship with Winter Park by doing this. So that's something that goes into the offer as well. And then come back and we'll have another fun discussion about Maitland Park. And then we can bring up.
Okay. I have a question that would be helpful in direction.
Okay.
For the council. We've discussed about like different procedures that we can get that we could put in place to monetize the parking spaces. Does the council have any preference on whether it's a meter versus like a booth versus anything else above the ease of enforcement or the ease of administration for the staff?
Whatever gives Mark the least headaches.
Okay.
I would think a box that you go, like you said, plug in your space, plug in your tag. I would think.
And one of the things and I maybe think about this from a design standpoint, I think we've raised it before, was, when somebody comes around this loop, they're coming in off 1792, they're driving all the way down, they're putting a boat in at the bottom down there, and then they drive up and find out, oh, there's not a space for me. I mean, I imagine that had something to do with a lot of people who were parking on the grass and whatever else. If there's some way to notify people on the way down that the lot is full, we're going to probably save ourselves a lot of complication on the back end of that, because unless you let your friend out and let him go stand and try to defend one of those spaces while you get in line for the boat launch, and you're going to have a problem. So, but that's the way it goes.
People, people drive home. So I've seen it happen. I know friends that have done it. They drop off their boat, there's no parking spaces, they drive home. Someone else drives them back, and then they get picked up and go back out.
Right.
I mean, it's,
well,
once you've committed, you load up the cooler, the kids are excited, you're gonna find a way to make this happen, which is why I think we've just got to make sure whatever we do right away.
And someone, if you had a meter there, it might be able to tell you the lot's full.
Yeah.
I want to throw one more out, but I think, these ideas are better, because what I would always hear, and I don't know if y'all would ever hear this, it's like, well, yeah, I paid for an annual pass, I can't even park there.
Right.
Because I had people that thought we should make the whole thing a parking lot, so they can get.
Right.
But
Just so people, when they buy their pass,
anybody that
basically-
buys an annual pass, the very top line of the annual pass says, does not guarantee you parking. So we've done that for a couple of years now, so.
Well, that doesn't sound from complaining, I'm just saying.
I'm just saying that they are made aware that it is the passes allow them to be on the lake. It doesn't guarantee them a parking space, either here at Fort Maitland or down at Dinky Dock.
So Mark, so the two options here are Lindsay's, which is the metering of the deal, and if we can figure out a way to meter that, and the other is limiting, whether it's 6 or 3 or 9 or whatever parking spaces for annual passes, and letting the other day trippers come in, and everybody's got a pass, everybody's got to get a pass, but it has to be on there or take their.
And I think I like your idea, by the way, and I think either way we tie it to the pass program, just so there's not another step. Whatever we do, we tie it to that annual pass resident pass structure, whether it's a discount on parking or free parking or whatever.
And so the analysis is going to be somewhat legal, and it's going to be somewhat.
Right. And in the case of the annual pass, you're specifically thinking about only allowing Maitland residents to get an annual pass, right?
Well, or differential.
Or differential of the fee. I'm tossing out.
Okay.
And I think the discount on the parking is, I think, a cleaner way to do it. I was just, again, trying to not have another program. But if that institution of that other program is not super complicated and expensive, then great.
And I'll tell you from a legal perspective, the big question for me is there going to be any limitation on access at all, or is it going to be purely financial? Is it going to be purely you pay more versus city residents pay less? Because there's 2014 case, City of Miami was allowed to charge more for out of county residents for ambulance services. Obviously not exactly the same, but it was basically like, yes, the fact that your residents pay ad valorem taxes is enough of a rational basis to say that you out-of-towners pay more. But when it comes to limiting access, that's more complicated. So that's what I want to say. I can evaluate both, basically. We could be me included and anybody else. But we'll look into it.
That was easier and more productive than I thought. I love it. So, okay. We're done with discussion. Are there any reports, Mr. City Manager?
No, sir.
Mr. City Attorney?
I was just reading to you. I'm not sure if it was already covered. I don't think so. I got a letter from, or more accurately, City Manager got a letter from Seminole County waiving the portion of their interlocal requiring the city to take commercial waste to Seminole County. So I think that'll, the strength can say the effect of that, but I think that will help with the service somewhat. The Peacock Ford matter, Cliff may have covered this in the last meeting, but they dropped their Bert Harris claim in their most recent complaint, and are now just seeking a declaration that they can have a dealership forever and ever. And so that it very much changes the calculations. I don't know whether they're going to try to bring it back later on, but for now, Bert Harris, the claim for damages is no longer a part of the lawsuit. For now.
So they can bring that back. It's not dismissed with prejudice or anything. It's
right. It was dismissed without prejudice, and then they were given an opportunity to file an amended complaint, and they didn't. And so what I think might happen, well, I'll leave speculation for a minute, but I think they might try to bring that claim in another way. But in the meantime, we are proceeding as if they've lost that claim, and we'll be seeking fees. And we'll be responding to their amended complaint soon. And I believe that's it, unless you want commentary on recent legal events. Nothing for me.
Well, I mean, without invitation, I mean, wow, what legal events?
The governor vetoed the bill.
I was thinking about the Supreme Court.
Well, yeah, I don't want to steal your thunder on the actual Florida law that was going to.
Right.
He's getting paid to say it, so go ahead.
That's right. Right. Florida legislature passed a bill, SB 620, which would have put local governments everywhere subject to theoretical lawsuits for business damages when the business is regulated, and it causes more than 20% profit reduction for any business that's been established more than a certain number of years for the next 7 years. It was basically like a Bert Harris, and that was vetoed. So, you may have heard horror stories about that, but that's not going to be
Excellent. Okay, that's good to know. All right, anybody on council have a report? Starting? Nope.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's call it done. Thank you.